We reflect on the importance of remembering and learning from this history. Hearing directly from a survivor is an incredibly meaningful experience and a true privilege. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Eva Pearlman.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am very honored to be here in front of you to speak to you about my experience, which is only one in many experiences. And if you want a true understanding of the Holocaust, you will have to read many books and see a lot of pictures. There were many ways that children survived the Second World War. Either with kinder transport, people putting their children on a train to England out of Poland, and they never saw their children again. Children were taken in by good-meaning non-Jewish people in convents or neighbors or friends who also hid children to the best of their ability. Okay, two. My mother, no, the one before. I always start by thanking the non-Jewish people who helped us during the war. There were good people who helped the Jews, and there were evil people who betrayed them to the Nazis. So we were very fortunate. My life is just a total miracle. We were very fortunate that we were never betrayed, but we were helped by people who helped us survive. My mother grew up in this little village, in that little village near the Polish border in Germany. She experienced a lot of anti-Semitism already as a young kid. She was born in 1910. But at the age of 5, she decided she wanted to become a doctor. Her father was a jeweler. Jeweler and goldsmith and silversmith, and he was one of the first people to sell wrist watches. Only men had watches in those days, still with a gold chain in their pocket. My grandfather fought in the First World War, and he came back with wounded with an Iron Cross. And this was really a tragedy for all the Jews in Germany who fought in the First World War. They thought that when Hitler came to power before the Second World War, that nobody would touch a hair of their head because they had been good citizens. And instead of leaving Germany at the time, they stayed, and many of them did not make it. These are my grandparents on the top left I can't see. It's too big. No, the next one. Oh.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. My grandparents on the top left, my mother on the right, Charlotte, and her younger brother, Alfred. He was 2 years younger than her. And below you see my grandparents the way I met them 30 years later, after the war. So my mother did well. She was a good student. She just wanted to become a doctor, and she finally made it to Berlin, to the medical school where she was accepted. And she met my father, who was already a full-fledged patent attorney. He asked her to marry him, and she said, yes, but what about my studies? And he said, no problem, you continue with your studies. So they got married in 1931, and I was promptly born in 1932, in May of 1932, which makes me 92 now, so you don't have to do your math. Thank you. So my mother continued. So as soon as Hitler came in January of 1933, he made it impossible for Jews to continue working, especially in the white-collar activities. And my father was very lucky to have a colleague in France, in Paris, a non-Jewish patent attorney with whom he had worked already for several years, who wrote to him and said, if things become difficult in Germany, why don't you come to France, to Paris, and work with me, with us? And my father had not only the opportunity, but the wisdom to take it. And by August or September of 1933, remember the war would start in 39. By August of 33, my father was already in Paris. My mother stayed in Berlin, being a student, and my paternal grandparents were taking care of me. I was fortunate to have only one uncle, I only had one uncle, my mother's younger brother. My other grandmother had 4 babies, and only my father survived infancy. So I was lucky. That was a miracle in my life long before I was born. So I had I had only one cousin. One aunt, one uncle and his wife, yes. So my mother received this letter from the university in Berlin. You are hereby excluded from further studies at the Berlin University because of your fascist activities. My mother was a Marxist activities. My mother was not a Marxist. She was not interested in politics. All she wanted to do was become a physician. But that was an excuse that they used, and all the Jews, all the professors, the doctors, the lab technicians, everybody had to leave the university in October of 1933. They had 20 minutes to empty their lockers and go. So my mother packed me up and the furniture, and we went to France. Yeah. Yeah, you are better at this than I am. So I'm 18 months old when we got to France in November of 1933. And what happened to my uncle? So we lived in Paris then. On the top left, you see the building that my father worked in Berlin. And so my uncle was an apprentice in a huge agricultural complex near Berlin, where he wanted to learn agriculture with the best machinery of the day, because he intended to go with his young bride to Palestine. And they needed to know how to grow food and so forth the best way. And what happened was that his boss received this letter from the Hitler's party saying, I can't read it, you have been told a few weeks ago, to let the 21-year-old Jew go. It is unacceptable that a Jew should be working now in Germany when our good citizens cannot work and are dying of hunger. I'm making it up because I can't see the actual letter, but maybe you can read it. Yeah, okay. If you don't let this guy go immediately, you will suffer the consequences. So my uncle lost his job and decided to go to Palestine with his young wife. As you see on the left behind me, they must have lived in white tents there. And I want you to pay particular attention to the 2 pictures at the bottom and the right. This was Palestine. There was nothing there, not even a few bushes. And the only mode of transport was a donkey-drawn cart. That was Palestine in the 30s. So we lived first in a big apartment building near Paris. My mother had a little brother for me for my birthday in 1935. And then in 1938, she got pregnant again. And all her friends said to her, are you crazy to bring another child into the world? The war is about to start. What are you thinking? And my parents said, look, we have 2 children. We'll do whatever we can to save them. We'll do the same with 3. And we moved into this villa in Le Vésinet, where we had more room. And while my mother was expecting the 3rd child, my father sent his in-laws, my mother's parents, tickets to Shanghai on a ship to leave Marseille on the 9th of March, 1939. And he was told with those tickets, they will be able to cross the border to France and go down by train to Marseille and pick up the ship. China at the time was the only country that willingly accepted Jewish refugees from Europe. And so, not yet. My mother was called to the main railway station in Paris, expecting an 8-pounder about 2 weeks before giving birth. And when she arrived, the official was very nasty and said, okay, open those trunks, and besides, we don't want you here, you foreigners, why don't you go back where you came from? And my mother got so furious and so argumentative and so red in the face that he suddenly was afraid she would have the baby right there and then, and he said, okay, just F off, pardon my French. She came home without having to open the trunks, and sure enough, they were full of old clothes on the top, and and underneath was a lot of jewelry and silver things and watches and all kinds of things that my grandfather tried to save out of his shop. He had moved from his little village to Berlin with my grandmother while we were already in Paris, because nobody would go to the Jew anymore to buy anything. And he had established a new little shop there, and he ended up buying a lot of that stuff from other German Jews who wanted to leave in a hurry and who did not want to be encumbered with all this. So that is how my mother, with her strength and her courage, saved everything from these 2 trunks. So what happened to my grandparents? They arrived at the border with France and they were not let into France. So I don't know how they found their way to Italy, and on this little ship like this one, on the back, on the bottom left, a little illegal boat to Palestine. There were lots of those around, and they took this boat and they had a terrible trip of about 6 weeks on the Mediterranean Sea. They arrived in Palestine. The British would, of course, shoo them out. They went to Cyprus. They were put in a camp. They gave everything they possessed, down to their wedding rings, just to get a piece of bread and a glass of water every day. They tried to go again, they were rebuffed again, etc., etc. It took them 6 weeks. And you see my grandmother on that publication there. This is my grandmother on the cover of this publication, which must have appeared in Palestine at the end of 1939, I guess. So anyway, so they made it to Palestine through the water, and fortunately their son, my uncle, was already there and welcomed them and helped them settle. What happened to my other set of grandparents? They suddenly appeared on our doorstep in our villa in August of 1939, just before the war started. And I was fortunate to get to know them. So France now was being invaded by the Nazis, and we were going to move several times to try to get out of their way, not to be found. First, we would go down from Paris to the first stop, a little castle about 150 miles south. Then we would go to Lyon, where we would stay for a year, and then Grenoble. We did not live in Grenoble, but we will end up in a little village on the southwest of Grenoble, in the mountains. It's a mountainous area. So in August, so my father's boss, Monsieur Placereau, to whom I owe an immense debt of gratitude, said to some of his workers, including my father, I want you to leave Paris. I don't want you to be found by the Nazis. And he rented a little castle in Massé, which my father took me to along with my first brother. I was 8, he was 5 in 1940. He took us to this castle. And last year in June, I went with my 2 daughters and 1 granddaughter to France, and we retraced our steps, and we found that castle. And that was one of the thrills of my trip. On the left, you see a picture taken in 1940 of the people at the castle and Monsieur Placereau on his motorcycle in front. He came to visit. This is the first time last year that I learned that there were lots of other people working in the castle. I thought we were only my brother and me and my father. I remembered that we had lots of sirens going all the time. I was taken with acute appendicitis to the hospital in the nearest town and operated on immediately. And the doctor said to my father, "Your daughter is lucky to make it. Her appendix was about to burst." In those days, it was usually fatal because we had no antibiotics yet. So we found the castle, and from that old picture, we found it across the street, actually, and there it is. So you can tell the three windows at the top and the tower are the same on both. And we found the veranda under which my father had his desk and desk chair. And one day during a bombing, we always went into the basement when we heard the sirens. When we came out of the basement, we found that a piece of a bomb had come through the glass roof of the veranda under which my father had his desk chair and desk. And the piece of bomb had gone straight through the chair, through the roof and through the chair. So if my father had stayed at his desk, he would have been killed instantly. Everything in my life is just a miracle. So there you see the inside of where my father had his desk and desk chair. So France was divided into two sides. The top side, the pink side, was the occupied side by the Germans, and the blue area is still the free zone. And you can see the line between the two. So my father, after a few months, decided we should leave the castle and go to Lyon. In the meantime, my mother had stayed with the baby and my grandparents in Paris, and my grandfather died suddenly of pneumonia in January of 1941, and my mother was not even able to tell my father that his father had passed away because all communications were controlled by the Nazis. So in 1941, we are now in Lyon, and my mother comes to that line and tries to cross with the baby and my grandmother. And again, an official said to her, "Okay, you and the baby, you can go, the old woman stays behind." And my mother said, "No, I'm not going to leave her here by herself. If you don't let her through, you force me to stay with her and the baby here, and if anything happens to us, it will be on your conscience for the rest of your life." And she made such a fuss that he finally had enough, and he said, okay, just go. And we were in Lyon. We lived in Lyon for a year. So in 1942, Lyon-Caluire. Caluire is in the suburbs of Lyon. In 1942, we are 10, 7, and 3. And the Nazis are very close. They are actually all over Lyon already. So my mother said to my father, "We have to do something to shelter these children to maybe a safer place." There was no safe place, but it could be safer. So she went to that area that I showed you southwest of Grenoble, which is a plateau about 3,000 feet above sea level, which was speckled with homes for children that were boarding schools in the winter and spring, and then in the summer they became luxury summer camps for parents who wanted to take a vacation by themselves, and they knew that children would be well taken care of. And my mother went to 30 of those homes all over that mountain, and they were all full to capacity, which goes to show that there were other people who wanted to shelter their children. Finally, she came to the very last one, Clairefontaine. Clairefontaine in Otem in 1942. And Madame Montonex, who you see pictured above, I'm standing next to her, and my brother Ernest is in front here. Madame Montonex agreed to take the 3 Jewish children at the risk of her life and the life of her family. If the Germans came into any home where they found one Jew, they would kill not only the Jew, but all the people in the house, and they would burn the house down. So she was risking her life. But she took us in, and my mother took us there. I had a little a romance with her son. I was 10, he was 11, and we were guarding the cows together. Next. This is the only picture. So my mother came several times to see us in Clairefontaine, and one day she got an urgent message from my father, "Stay up there, I'm coming." My father had decided it was time for him to leave Lyon as well. He was more Jewish looking than the rest of us. We were all blonde and blue-eyed. And even my father had blue eyes, but he had a good Jewish nose. He looked Jewish. So my father came to Otem, and he rented the upstairs of this house in the middle, the yellow house. And our landlord and landlady lived below. Monsieur and Madame Bravo, they were also risking their lives. And their two daughters in the middle, Colette at the bottom, my age, and Georgette, who was already 20 years old. And so my mother arrived in that kitchen of hers and decided, we lived, you see Caluire up there? No, you don't. There is a red arrow, but it's not showing. No, it's okay. So she decided to go to Lyon for the day to pick up a few things in her kitchen. So she arrived at the station. No, I'd better get up. She arrived at the station. Here. She took a tramway up. This is Lyon, and we were up in Caluire. So she took a tramway up along the Rhône River, got off here, ran up the hill, made up a package of all the things she needed from her kitchen, and was having tea at her landlady's downstairs when suddenly she looked at her watch and she said, "Oh my God, I can't miss my train." And she said a quick thank you and goodbye, took a tramway back there on the other side of the Rhône River, ran over this bridge this way to the station, arrived at the platform when the guy was whistling for departure, and jumped onto the train. And then the train started slowly its way. It's on its own bridge going this way down here. And as she was still huffing and puffing and taking off her hat and looking out the window, she saw that the bridge she had just run across 15 minutes earlier on her way to the station had been cordoned off by Nazis, and they were asking for papers. My parents had become French, but her name was still Charlotte Gutmann, born in Germany, and she would have been toast. And we found out also last year that the main Nazi headquarters were a spit and a jump from the bridge, and they must have gone several times to do raffles on the bridge to nab people who wanted to leave, who were on their way to the station. So a miracle. She escaped by 15 minutes. Last year, there I'm standing on the bridge that she crossed on the left this way, and you see in the distance the railway bridge, which looks further than it really is, but I can't show it. But you can see it, okay. So Otem is a beautiful valley with low mountains and full of trees. So when we had alerts that the Germans were coming, we had time to run into the mountains. My father had found 3 farmers who were willing to take one of us children each in case of the Germans came up the mountain. We had many alerts. And we didn't have telephones in our homes. You had to go to the post office to make a phone call. So how did we get alerted? The first post office down in the plain near Grenoble that saw the Germans coming up the mountain, starting to come up the mountain with their heavy equipment, would phone the next post office, that phones the 3rd post office, that phones the 4th, etc., up the mountain. And from every post office, 2 people would immediately run, one to the bakery, one to the hotel, and 2 people would run from the bakery and the hotel to warn 2 more people who would run to warn 2 more people. so that in 5 or 10 minutes, everybody who had to run into the mountains had time to do so. We were always ready at a moment's notice to pick up a coat and run. My father went, my father went on his bicycle 3 times a week to buy an egg here, a glass of milk there, and a potato somewhere else. And he brought enough food home that we did not starve to death. He was able to work part-time for the office in Lyon, which was an annex of the Paris office. Monsieur Placereau made it possible for my father to work part-time by sending a receptionist from Lyon to Grenoble once a week, and my father would take the bus and go down to Grenoble, and they would exchange files. He would give her the files that he had worked on, and she would give him new files. And he did everything by hand, by the way. He didn't even have a typewriter in those days. I was able to go to school. They had a boys' school in Otem, which was willing to take a few girls because of the circumstances. What you have to understand is that Otem, before the war, had 1,000 inhabitants, and in those days, when we were there were 2,000 people living there. Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, all right, so we lived there. The Allies came to Normandy, and we were very happy, and we went on a picnic to the top of the mountain, the next one. Sadie, the next. We went, and the German planes came to bomb our valley while we were sitting on the mountain with a picnic. So the next day, my father, with his male friends who had followed us, decided to join the French resistance. And after the men left, that was a miracle that they have left, the Germans really came to Otem and into our house. And the next day, my mother was called downstairs by the landlord, "Madame, can you please come and help me? I don't know what they want." And my mother spoke very, very bad German, putting just a few words together with French accent without making a grammatical sentence. And she said they want a room in the house and they want to be fed in the house. So Monsieur Ravo said, "Okay, my wife and I will feed them." He said to my mother, "Why don't you give your bedroom since your husband is away?" And my mother had to give up her bedroom to the 2 Nazis who slept in there next to the 3 Jewish children for 2 weeks in our house, while my mother was on a cot in the attic, and she spent her time at the window because she was afraid that my father would come in the middle of the night and throw a pebble against the bedroom window to alert her to come downstairs to unlock the door. Then my mother had a bicycle accident that saved her life. She received a little paper that the men were okay, but they needed some male clothing, and she, without thinking, rented a bicycle, and with a young friend of hers, they went up the hill, had their sandwich, and as they started to go down the hill, my mother found out that her bicycle didn't have any brakes, and they had an accident. They slipped on the gravel. Fortunately, it was a God-sent accident, because had they continued on their journey, they would have gone straight into all the German lines, the German armies that were still stationed around Grenoble, and 2 young women with male clothing on their bicycle, they would never have made it. This is our family after the war. We went back to Lyon first for a year, and then Paris. I became a nurse to go to Israel because I came out of the war with a huge inferiority complex. The next one. Being Jewish in an anti-Semitic country and being born in Germany. And I met my husband, who also wanted to go live in Israel. We went to Oxford, where he did his PhD in social anthropology. Then he got a job at Berkeley, and in the 60s. So we came to America in 1963 with 3 children. And the great thing in my life has been the March of the Living, which I've gone on 9 times with students from LA, learning in Poland about the Holocaust. And if you go to Poland and you visit concentration camps, this is the best education you can have about the Holocaust, when you see where it happened and you listen to the stories. I don't have time, so, in 2011, I found out that from my granddaughter who lives in Israel, that she found Jean Montanex, you know, the guy with whom I guarded the cows. He now lived in southern France, and we went to see him and his wife after 70 years with no communication. And I will always remember the hug he gave me. He never forgot me, as I never forgot him either. And we were just kids. The next one. We went back to Otem, the house is still yellow, and we had lunch with the daughters of our landlord and landlady. You remember them, the young girls, and the lady behind me now is 101, the older one of the 2 daughters. And she told us something that really floored us at the time last year. She said during the war, when the Germans were sleeping in our house, she overheard her mother say to her father, "I wonder if those Germans are suspecting the people upstairs of being Jews. Why didn't they do or say anything? Is it maybe because they are tired of the war? It was August 1944, they knew they were losing it. Did they have a little bit more moral fiber than other Germans? Were they Nazis only because they had to be part of the army, or else they would have been killed? We will never know. But whether they suspected us of being Jews or not, the very fact that nothing happened to us was a miracle. And I also, do you have another minute? I wanted to show you those here. No, yeah. Those, my hatred of everything German has finally been put to rest when I met 2 wonderful non-Jewish German women who have spent their lives working for Jewish causes. They feel the responsibility and the guilt of what their fathers and grandfathers did during the war. And they put those stumbling stones into the sidewalks. And as I was invited back to Berlin by one of those ladies, and a ray of light fell into that at my feet, and I saw that it was my father's best friend. It says, here worked Dr. Julius Blumenthal, attorney, born in 1900, taken prisoner in Sachsenhausen, murdered on the 3rd of December 1942. That's how I found out what happened to my father's best friend. We also went to the village where my mother was born. It's still the same. Next. And they are the 2 ladies on the right, who I've befriended, who are absolutely wonderful human beings. And my beautiful mother died in 2001 of Alzheimer's. She was never able to put behind her the fact that she could not finish her medical studies. I'm blessed with 6 grandchildren on the bottom right. I have 3 children, each has 2 children. And I now have 10 great-grandchildren. Only 7 are pictured because it's an old picture. Next, last. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to take questions, and remember that you have become the eyewitness of an eyewitness, because